All right, great. Let's go ahead and get started. We want to make sure to make best use of your time today. First off, just hello and welcome to today's webinar on turning news monitoring into actionable public affairs strategy. First to start off, introduce myself. My name is Mike Esser, and I'm an account executive here at Quorum. So I'm excited to talk with you on this topic because prior to joining Quorum, I worked in the media relations field in DC, helping organizations strategize their press and media relations outreach. So now I actually get to bring that past media experience to Quorum's public affairs audience and help to combine what we can do in the media relations and news monitoring space with that broader legislative strategy. Now, some of you might not be familiar with Quorum at all yet. So just a quick background. So Quorum is fully integrated public affairs software. And what it does is it lets you map, track, and work to change and then report back on that entire policy landscape. Now, what that means is your team can track legislation and regulations, manage your relationships with government officials and stakeholders, and engage grassroots advocates all in the same platform, all in one place. Now, Quorum works with clients at the local, state, federal, EU, even international level to provide the monitoring and tracking their teams need. And these include clients such as Walmart, the American Heart Association, the Department of the Air Force, Human Rights Watch, Coca-Cola, Adventist Health. We continue to strive to be the best place for these teams to do their work and are continually improving the platform to make it a better place to do so. So one of the newest products we've added to Quorum's platform is news monitoring. This means news and legislation can now work together in one place to provide increased visibility and maybe foresight into that ever-changing policy landscape. Now, you might be thinking, okay, so I'm an issues expert on the policy areas my organization cares about. And of course, you spend each morning catching up on the important news, the New York Times, the Washington Post, Axios, Playbook. While these publications do an exceptional job detailing what's happening in Washington. And yeah, in election years on the campaign trail, they aren't the only publications that a legislator is reading before they start their day. Legislators are also spending time reading their local publications, such as the Boston Globe, the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, the Richmond Times-Dispatch. So for example, in August alone, the New York Times published 20,600 articles in print and online. Now, okay, that sounds like a lot, but in comparison to the hundreds of local publications across the country, the New York Times volume is tiny. Local publications published 5.2 million articles in that same time span. Many of these publications are the ones that legislators, both in Congress and in state houses, read every day and care about. So let's take an example. So let's look at Rep. Marcia Fudge, for example. She's mentioned 0 times in the New York Times, but 100 times in industry publications and 356 times in local publications. Now, that's not to mention the papers that aren't talking about her by name, but are talking about her top issues. So imagine if we're just reading the national publications to get a grip on what legislators are considering. We're missing out on all this critical information. Okay, so maybe we've convinced you to read the local news from a legislator's district. But when we do, what are we looking for? And let's talk about that. So this is what the meat of our conversation is today. We're going to focus on 5 strategic ways that you could incorporate news into your preparations for legislative engagements and into your interactions with legislators and their staff. And then we're going to give you a quick look into Quorum itself. So I'll show you a couple of examples both in the presentation and then live on the platform to show you how our news monitoring system can help you both be smarter and move faster. And finally, we'll end with any questions and answers you have. You can see there's a Q&A button down at the bottom. Please feel free to toss those in along the way, and we'll get to those at the end. All right, well, let's dive straight in. Okay, so our first strategy that I want to cover with you today for incorporating news into your public affairs planning, the local view, right? News monitoring helps you uncover the district angle for a policy. So, while your issue may have a national objective, its implications may be unique to each state or district. For example, say you're arguing for a national environmental plan. The impacts of policy changes to address climate change are distinctive based upon the economic and geographic landscape of each district. Those on the West Coast might not be the same as those on the East Coast. With those factors, a legislator's constituents may have perspectives on your issue that are informed by their region, more so than by their political ideology. By reading a legislator's district news, you can learn the tone constituents use to discuss your issue, the stories they tell when talking about your issue, the local implications they discuss when considering how they stand on an issue. Now, to do this, let's uncover the answers to questions that we might ask as we're looking through these news articles, such as, what vocabulary a reporter is using to describe your issue in their local publication? What kind of headlines are editors using for the stories that we're seeing on your issue? So once you understand the district angle of your issue, bringing those local talking points into your pitch on why a legislator should act in a certain way, it could be a critical part to actually getting them to agree with your perspective or prioritize your issue. Now, if there's local terminology that you see consistently across all those news articles, we'll consider using it in that conversation with that member. Now, let's look at a specific example of this. So if your key policy was education and you were meeting with a legislator from Ohio, let's say, you might have found this article in the Yellow Springs News that discusses students' return to school this year. If your organization was interested in expanding charter schools with this article, you might, before your meeting, consider bringing statistics about the growth in students opting to go to charter schools. You might be able to use the stories that parents are telling about their decision-making process in your conversation with the legislator. Maybe you can learn from the vocabulary and tone used in the article to uncover how the district might react about your specific issue. Now, in this article, the title uses the word explore to describe how parents are approaching school choices this year. Now, explore tends to have a positive connotation and therefore could tell you that there's an appetite for conversations about alternative methods of education this year. All right, let's move on to that second strategy, right? So we've looked at how the district's view is, some of the language that's being looked at, but now let's look at priorities. That is what news monitoring can also help with, is to uncover how important your issue is within a district, and thus a legislator's priorities. So once you've got a grasp of how a legislator's district views your policy issue, let's consider how many stories are appearing in local publications on your issue. The member's constituents may wholeheartedly support your organization's stance on an issue, but where do they stand? Where does it stand in their list of priorities for different policy areas? What else is influencing their decision making? So here's an example that we built out. So to understand where your issue stands on a district's priority list through the news, first, let's look at the major local publication. Okay, so first we're going to look at the top local paper and see the full collection of stories over a given period. Then we're going to take that, we're going to run a search amongst that publication for articles mentioning your issue, right? To find the percentage of stories that are mentioning your issue. And we can do that inside of the platform. Then we'll do the same search for other major policy areas that appear in the news. And then we're going to compare the volume of coverage. Now, in this example, education is higher than other major federal policies like the environment or finance policy, but is less than healthcare. So in this case, you'll probably have a receptive ear for education policy conversations, but ultimately the legislator will prioritize making progress on health policy if forced to choose between the two. Now, continuing with this example, generally newspapers are not dramatically changing their output month to month. So at trends over time, you can help to understand how your issue is shifting in priority within the community. With this example, we can see that generally the issue is increasing in volume across the state, meaning that your conversation will likely be received well and prioritized well. If there's a significant spike in dialogue in a given district, you can use that data to convince the member to act expeditiously. Now let's get into that third way to incorporate news monitoring in your public affairs strategy, which is to find local stories about your organization or issue to share with that official. So a frequent recommendation, and I'm sure many of you have heard it before, from legislators on making your message stand out is to share a local story. The local story helps the legislator to A, remember your issue better due to its personalization. And B, have stories to use in potential floor speeches, conversations with other legislators. For organizations with a large or international footprint, where it's challenging to keep up with the news of every business's location, quickly searching the local press for recent stories mentioning your organization can provide a personal touch point. Here's a great example of this. So a longtime client, Walmart, keeps a report on every time it is mentioned in the news, such as when it opens a new store or makes a donation to a local organization. As soon as Senior Manager in Public Affairs, Matt Fitzgerald, learns of a press mention, he uses it to engage the representatives of that district. And here's an example of that. So this story was published in Greene, Ohio, and syndicated around the state about how Walmart has supported the community with a campaign to provide school supplies to children who are struggling to buy them during the pandemic. These kinds of stories have a multitude of uses. So first, you can share them via email. And sending that to that legislator, just to remind them of the impact of your impact in the district, can be helpful, even if you don't have an immediate ask. Then, later down the road, when you do have an ask, you'll be more top of mind. A second way we can use them, if there are organization employees mentioned in the article. Those could be good individuals to approach as advocates, to share their story with legislators in a follow-up call, meeting. And the final way that we can use these is to help the legislator acknowledge what's going on in their community. And we can do that by helping them do some work already. So by pre-drafting some materials for them, maybe social posts, maybe some other type of materials about what's happening in their district. Okay, so we've talked about a number of things that we can do with those news articles, but let's take a step back. And the next strategy that I want to talk to you about is the players, right? So along with uncovering local stories, news monitoring can help to meet the local players on your issue who you might not be familiar with. So look at who is being quoted in these stories on your issue, or writing letters to the editor, to understand who else the legislator is hearing from on this issue when they leave DC. Then identify if they are a potential partner for your cause or an opponent you should consider as you move forward. Good examples to look at here are the opinion section or letters to the editor. These show you both the people who are committed enough to your issue to submit their views to the newspaper, and allows you to read their stories and views in their own words rather than through the words of a reporter. Now, here's an example. This is a letter to the editor you might consider reviewing, again, if you were working in Ohio. Now, if you are pitching on a certain funding policy for schools, let's say, make sure you know how arts would fit in, because it's possible that the legislator has heard from this stakeholder who wrote the letter. And if the writer aligns with your views, maybe it's helpful. Maybe you consider reaching out to them, tell them about your upcoming meeting with a legislator, and ask for their input. So in addition to helping you be the most prepared for your engagements with legislators, you can also use news monitoring to make sure that legislators have read the stories that help your case by including them in a leave behind. This is this last piece that I want to talk to you about as far as strategies that we're looking at today. Now, legislators likely aren't reading the local paper cover to cover, right? So we can't assume that they've read all the coverage on your issue. Now, with Quorum, we can actually use that download center to build out a PDF that tells the story of your issue with news stories from a legislator's district. Now, if it's an important story, include it in the leave behind. And whether you're physically leaving it behind or, during COVID-19, you're actually emailing it out. So with all of that said, what I want to do now is I want to transition over to the actual live platform. Let's take a look at these examples in the platform itself. Now, as we swipe over here, the first that we're going to see is this yellow Springs News article. What we're seeing here is that not only are we going to have some basic information about the article itself up top, but we're also going to be able to search that full text of the article for a specific term. Now here we're looking at schools. Now, we're also going to have a view of how it is actually formatted on the website itself. So here we're seeing that full text of the article itself. Now, what I also think is core to having a solution that is all in one place is the fact that everything talks to each other. So if we had a meeting about this specific article, yes, we can be able to track those. Or if we wanted to see its syndication or other articles like this, we're also going to be able to do so. Now, let's see that in let's see the system in action. So here, we're looking at that second example that we brought up during the webinar, and we're searching for the Walmart campaign. And I want to be able to come in and look just at the state of Ohio. So we're going to use some of these filters on the side. Now, we can see that, yes, we're going to have online news, we're going to have blogs, we're going to have print. We are also pulling in broadcast transcripts, as well as podcasts. One of the things interesting here is as we look at the specific article that we had talked about, yes, we are going to be able to pull in, again, the specific term that we're searching for. But again, we're also going to be able to see that syndicated article as it is formatted on this specific medium. Now, the other part that I want to point out here is that we're also going to allow you the ability to start to sort and file. So we can take articles like this and say, oh, yeah, let's store that. Let's add it to a list so we have it for later. Let's add it to a folder so that we're able to sort each one of these by specific issue that it mentions. And then let's even set our organization's stance on a priority level to be able to look at these different pieces. Now, the last piece that we're looking at here is, of course, this opinion page on the arts. And again, what I think is interesting to look at is that here we are using the system to not only understand what is being said, or the tone that's being said, but also who are those players. So if we need the ability to actually build out let's say a custom contact for this player, we can do that through the system and understand the more dynamics environment that our legislative environment is existing in. So with that said, I want to come into our question and answer portion. Of course, let's use the notes on the bottom of the screen here to be able to add in any questions that you have at this time. And Satya, I appreciate you being able to flag any of those that have come in. Okay, first question that's coming in here. So how often should we be monitoring the news mentions, et cetera, that are coming across from a legislator's district? So best practice for being able to monitor, especially for your key issues. Let's say we've used the quorum system and set up an alert. Okay, great. So we're going to be able to get any mention of education in the state of Ohio that from all of our papers, blogs, news, etc. Now, what about if it is a specific organization's name? Maybe I want to be able to get that through the mobile app, and I want to know every single time that there's a mention. But there's also a number of tools that we can use inside of a platform like Quorum, which are going to include our auto updating sheets tool to be able to see all of those different types of news. So if we're looking across a number of different terms, we're going to be able to have that all in one place, all in the same spreadsheet that's automatically updating as we have that information. We're also going to be, so in terms of other questions, and other best practices when we're thinking about news monitoring, I think the other thing to keep in mind is most teams are going to set up some type of an alert and then be able to look at that possibly once or twice a week, other than their main really hot key topics. Okay, next question that's coming in here. Is it important to follow a specific beat reporter who covers my issue for a major local paper? So of course, understanding not only the players, let's say those who a legislator is hearing about most, but also who is writing, right? Because if we're talking about the local beat reporter for the politics beat, yeah, they're going to know a lot about what's going on. Or maybe on the education beat, they're going to have a pretty good idea about your issue, and they're going to be one of those major players who is adding voice or possibly causing commentary. So really understanding what is going on with that beat reporter and following them is going to be critically important. Now, of course, the other part of that is, do you engage with that reporter? And I think that very much depends upon your organization's strategy and how much grassroots work you're actually doing in the district. If you're just monitoring things, definitely good to just keep an eye on what's going on. If there's an actual on-the-ground beat and you think you can work with your communications team to frame it up correctly, yeah, I would encourage you to reach out to that reporter. Next question here is, you mentioned preparing posts for legislators so that they can easily share news stories. Do you have a tool, does your tool have a template for that type of thing? So in terms of preparing posts for the legislator, those are things that I've seen a lot of organizations do in terms of materials that they have available when they walk in, so that you can easily hand that off to the, let's say, walking into a congressional office, being able to hand that over to their communications folks. With the platform itself, our focus, of course, is on providing that best materials for you to be able to do so, to be able to have all of that. Next question here is, what future role could AI play in identifying patterns on issues? How can we see trends in keywords, could we soon see patterns amongst political actors or make forecasts? So I think this is a great question about the way we can use the automation of our tracking to actually be able to forecast out just a little bit. Now, of course, if we're looking at, let's just say, a when chart, right? We can easily be able to look over the past, maybe say month, a couple of months, and be able to see a trend chart in the Quorum platform of when all of those are posting. What I think is interesting is as we start to forecast. Right. So if we can look at a trend in the stories, we can look at the spikes coming up, can we look forward a little bit? I think that is both in terms of the tools that are the absolutely brilliant work that our CTO, Jonathan Marks, has done to be able to give us this graphing perspective and to be able to start to actually put the scatter points out. Yes, I think we can start to forecast a little bit. Do I think that's more, let's say, qualitative than quantitative? Probably. But I do think that there is a lot that we can do in terms of being able to look a little bit forward for our, let's say, from a business perspective or from a nonprofit's perspective of looking out towards, a Q1 2021 and trying to get a feel for what the current conversation is going to be. Next question coming in here is there a connection between news monitoring and Quorum's grassroots tool so that you can easily ask your advocates to share a story with their legislators? Is your solution scalable to include articles in other languages, such as in Spanish? So I will say the news platform, the news monitoring platform is available not only for the US news, but also for EU news and globally. In terms of integrations with our grassroots platform, yes, we do have a number of ways that we can incorporate these together. Now, the ability of the grassroots platform, it's just infinite. There's so much that we can do with that. And that, of course, is something that both our trainers internally with our customer success teams and our other members of the business development team like myself can work with you specifically to figure out how best to set that up for you. Next question coming in here, in the Quorum platform, are you able to search only local newspaper sources is this listed on the Documents tab? So in terms of what are we covering with our news monitoring? So this is full national global news monitoring. What we're able to do is pull in not only TV, cable, national print, online, etc., all the way down to that local level, blogs, podcasts, all that kind of thing. And we're able to do that because of the work that our team has done to make sure that we're pulling in that best content. What that means in terms of what I think is most relevant to, let's say, a national team. Yes, so we're going to be able to look at all of that national content that is most important, for your work. But I think my argument and the conversation we're having today is about what that local perspective can bring in terms of adding into your conversations with legislators. So in terms of the system's functionality, yeah, we're going to have all that information. You're going to be able to keyword search all of it and get an alert as soon as something pops up. Okay, great. Okay, one more question coming in here. In the Quorum platform, are you able to search only news sources or listed in the Documents tab? We'll go back and touch on this Documents tab comparatively to the News tab. So in the Quorum platform, we are maintaining databases, and those always are going back for our social traffic and for our official communications to legislators. So if we're talking about what we at Quorum call documents, that's going to include all the social traffic, all the official communications, press releases, newsletters, letters, etc. Now, that's all legislator specific. So as we add in news, we're going to be able to really expand the amount that your team is looking at. What does that mean? So if we're looking at, let's say, a business's operations, yes, it's really important to know what a legislator is saying about you. Are they going to pass legislation or regulation that impacts your revenue? Are they tweeting about you, or have they mentioned you in a press release? All critically important things. But what I think is also important is now we can take a step back. Because if, let's say, someone is talking outside of that legislator community in that broader sphere about the organization, about the ways in which that we're interacting, I think all of that becomes critically important to the work that we're doing in the legislative environment and what is impacting everything. So yes, documents, and that tab is going to be all of legislator-specific content and things coming out of the, from the Senate, from the representatives, from the governor's office, et cetera. News, we're going to be looking at all of that news from a local perspective, national, broadcast, et cetera. Okay, so last question here is, will we receive a recording of this presentation? Yes. So we will be both, if you are interested or if you have more follow-up questions, you can reach out to Quorum directly through the news link on the website. And of course, please click on the survey that's part of this, the Quorum Zoom link here. You can just see the polling link up top. And then just click through that really quick. Of course, we will also have this available for your viewing pleasure on a number of different places around the website and the YouTube channel. And please let me know if you have any questions specifically, and we'll get back to you right away. All right, I want to thank everybody for their time today. We're going to wrap it up there, and we look forward to hearing from you.